Good morning. Welcome to Viewpoint, your program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. And we've got a wonderful perspective for you this morning. And we'll just take about a second and cue that up, and away we go.
Mr. District Attorney, champion of the people, defender of truth, guardian of our fundamental rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Right, introduce our guest, Mr. Busby.
Good morning. It's good to be here with you again, Bill. This is my second and final week of co-hosting with you.
Well, we talked to Mrs. Busby about that.
Right. Last week we had a master gardener on, and I can talk dirt and seeds all day long, but this morning we're in a totally different arena. Our guest today is Jonathan Wright, a Logan County State's Attorney. I first became acquainted with Jonathan back when I covered City Council for the Courier here in town, and Jonathan came on board as City Attorney. And I found him to be a very pleasant, very honest, very open individual, and always was more than willing to cooperate with the press, which I appreciated very much. So, Jonathan, it's good to have you with us this morning.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here, and you read that intro just like I wrote it, so I appreciate that.
Not a problem, not a problem.
Well done. Yes, he didn't even stumble on the apostrophes.
Thanks for the quarter.
Yeah, right. That's great to be here. Thank you, Mr. Gossett, Mr. Tackett.
Well, Mrs. Busby and I have been, we try real hard, seriously. The two of us try real hard to plan ahead and get our guests lined up, and we try to book about a month in advance. And this winter we were talking, and she said we should bring Mr. Wright back on, and I said absolutely. So we have a lineup of guests. So you are one of the luminaries, sir. I would like to start their conversation this morning, Jonathan, and describe today's court system as opposed to what it was when I was a pup. The old police magistrate and justice of the peace organization, and how that evolved into our present court system. Would you address that, please, sir?
I'll do the best I can. Some of that predates my role as an attorney, a state's attorney, but they did used to have justices of the peace. In fact, I was sharing with Mr. Gossett before we went on air, I was doing some research yesterday for a case and ran across a 1967 case where a former justice of the peace out of Logan County sued Logan County because he wasn't getting paid. They had eliminated the role of the justice of the peace, and so he was suing for payment, and ultimately it went up into the court system. So kind of a fascinating way to segue into what we're talking about this morning.
Exactly.
But a lot of the justice of the peace role was much like what they still have in the federal court system today with magistrates, where they take some of the, quote, lesser cases and take that burden off the judges. But those were eliminated, I think, late 60s, and then now we just have circuit judges, and then we have associate judges within our circuit. We're in the 11th circuit, right, which includes Logan County, McLean County, Woodford County, Ford County, and Livingston County.
Well, Judith and I talk almost incessantly, I'll admit to that, Fiddler, about the quality of service that we get out of our Logan County courthouse. We like to say, and I think perhaps pretty close, we have the best courthouse in 102 counties. The folks who service in the major offices there, and I think Mr. Ash would agree to that we're just lucky to have the service out of the courthouse that we get. Now, what are some of the what would be, perhaps, Mr. Wright, one of the most pressing problems you have in your capacity as a district attorney or state's attorney?
On the criminal side, and of course, as state's attorney, I also represent the county and do the civil work for the county. On the criminal side, and I don't think this is going to come as anyone's surprise, it's certainly the drug problem is persistent in this county. I don't think it's unique to Logan County, talking to other state's attorneys, and certainly just reading the headlines.
Right.
So we continue to try to address that. And the court system's trying to address it in different ways than just the traditional aspect. Some of you may have heard of drug court.
Right.
And they're trying to develop what they call now problem-solving courts that don't just focus on drug court, but I know in January of 2018, statewide mandate every circuit's supposed to have a veterans court. There are some jurisdictions that have Native American courts. Of course, we don't have that population here, so I don't know if that'll come to pass. There's mental health courts. I know McLean County has a mental health court. So they're also trying to develop different ways to address the problem than just traditional criminal justice perspectives.
Is that part of a thrust or an initiative to cut down on the prison population, or
Not in.
is there a more deeper social aspect to all that?
Yeah, there is that prison reform that's being touted by Governor Rauner, but this predates that. It actually, the drug court scenario started in Miami, of all places. A judge took kind of upon himself, was seeing the rate of recidivism with those who were addicted to drugs, the repeat of offenses even after they got out of jail and prison. So he developed some different ways of approaching it, and it became a model for other jurisdictions. Pike County was one of the early ones in the state of Illinois to do it because 10, 12 years ago, they were hit hard with methamphetamine.
Okay.
And so they started to use it in Pike County, and then it became a statewide mandate. And Logan County's had it for 8 years, 9 years.
Okay, who presides over that?
Judge Funk.
Okay, so it is one of the judges.
Correct. So it's local to our county. It meets every week, and it's designed to have a different aspect. So in our system, it's set up that if they're found guilty or plead guilty, they can be sentenced to drug court if they are found to be what they call high risk, high need. They have an addiction and their risk to reoffend is high. Then they're put in this program, and it's an intensive probation style program. Okay. So they go through different phases. In phase 1, they're reporting every week. They're getting drug tested multiple times a week. They're also going to drug treatment. And so what they found through this program is that when you can have some immediate consequences, that can have better effect than having to file a petition to revoke, waiting another 3 to 4 months, attorney gets appointed, hearing gets set. So there's a gap in that scenario between the offense and the relapse, perhaps, and then getting the consequence for it. Here, if there's an issue during the week, the consequence comes that very next week.
If I understand it correctly, I think prescription pills are becoming a kind of a drug of choice. Am I correct in that assumption?
It's true. The opiates are a problem.
It's just incredible to sit here and talk about that and realize what it does to a youngster and how it can totally affect the rest of their lives, and yet they step up and give that a try.
And that's one of the focuses through the Abraham Lincoln Memorial Hospital Foundation. There's this heroin roundtable that's been started. And to really try to address the problem, it's got to be kind of multi-focused. And one of the areas is to make people aware of their prescription medication pills. Sometimes people have them, they don't use all of them, they sit in the cabinet for a while, and that can be a temptation for kids and grandchildren. So we're really trying to educate the community. Those can be brought to the Lincoln Police Department and disposed of properly. We're discouraging people from flushing them or just throwing them away, because that just puts it in the system in a different form. But we're trying to encourage them to get it to the Lincoln Police Department and dispose of them so they're not kind of floating around, so to speak.
You see, there's a lot of work behind the scenes, Fiddler, in our law enforcement communities, both the county and the city level, that we have no cognizance of at all, that has to do with this doggone drug problem. And it's such an insidious thing. Addiction is a terrible thing. Lord knows they have alcoholic treatment centers for years, and people out, and then the first thing you know, they're back in again. And it's a terribly debilitating disease to the community, and very costly.
It is to the person, to their family. The families go through an awful lot as well too, trying to help.
I'm sure.
And then they sometimes get burned over the years by helping, and they go through their own kind of catharsis with dealing with a family member who has the addiction. And then the criminal justice system often interacts. Sometimes it's just a straight possession of a controlled substance. Sometimes it's a theft, a forgery, trying to get their hands on money so they can get their addiction.
Support their habit.
Yeah, that's a spin-off there. Mr. Wright, what is the makeup of your office? How many do you employ in your office, sir?
Besides myself, there's 2 assistant state's attorneys, and then
We're
we
short
have
one now.
What's that?
And we're short one now.
We're short one today, so I do apologize. I have to leave a little early to
Yeah,
be
we'll
back
get him
in
out of
court
here.
by
He
then.
has to be in court at 9 o'clock, folks. So
And then I have 3 support staff. So we have 5 altogether. No, I'm sorry, 6 altogether in the office.
Yeah, but before we leave the drug,
no, we don't. Yeah.
I guess my question is, obviously, you're correct. There's no surprise in the fact that drugs are a major problem in our midst. Logan County, I don't see or hear much, though, about a couple other problems associated with drugs in bigger cities especially, and that's gangs and armed violence. Do we have any kind of gang structure in the county?
I would say that there's people who have affiliations with gangs in the county, but we don't see any of the structure within the county.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yes,
Yeah.
it does.
And there's different levels of associations with gangs, and perhaps they lived in a different community before and were part of a gang and have relocated here, but we don't see the gang structure here. There's informal aspects to drug dealing. You know, you certainly have a food chain, so to speak, of who's dealing and what amounts and where they're getting it from, but we don't necessarily see the gang structure. I give kudos to our law enforcement, and we've had some good sentences when it comes to dealing of drugs, and so I would like to think that's had some deterrent effect for the gun violence that thankfully we don't have,
Right.
and the gang situation.
Right. Since we're talking about that, and you mentioned, people with gang affiliation moving into the area, and bringing that with them, I guess it's probably a question that a lot of people out there won't want to hear, but we have 2 prisons in town, and I've often wondered if the fact that those 2 prisons are here brings an undesirable element into town to live temporarily. Is that a problem or part of the problem you see?
It's not something that I've ever studied out statistically.
Right.
I just anecdotally, I would certainly say there's some element to that in terms of just relocating locally, either
Right.
upon discharge or family may move to the area,
Right.
so it's easier to visit and have contact.
Sure.
And of course now we not only have 2 prison facilities, but on the female side, we are now a maximum facility as well too.
Exactly.
But I can't really say that's the primary aspect of it.
Right. And like I say, I realize that there's a little bit of controversy there because the prisons, with all their jobs, have certainly been a blessing to the area.
Oh boy.
But
Absolutely.
I think there's also a bit of a curse.
Yeah, and none of that is meant to be critical on my part. I just think there are some realities to it, and certainly it's been
Well,
a help with a lot of
that's the key
jobs.
word. The reality of it is that's exactly what happened.
But I can't say that's the bulk of what we're dealing with
Right.
people moving into the community from other areas.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's happened.
Without putting a percentage on it, the criminal cases your office is involved with, how big is the drug factor in those criminal cases?
I'm pausing to think because I don't want to put
I'm sure I understand.
a percentage on it, but I would say safely that the majority of our cases are drug, and by drug I also include alcohol.
Sure.
Sure.
Have an element to it. A lot of the domestic violence cases we have, alcohol or some drug oftentimes is at issue, not all the time, but
Right.
oftentimes is at issue. A lot of our abuse and neglect cases where children are getting pulled from homes has to do with people who are suffering from addictions, and tragically their children suffer because of it.
Right.
We certainly have a lot of the property offenses are affiliated with that. Again, it's a corollary aspect to it, but
Sure,
they're trying
right.
to get money for their addiction.
Right.
So I would say that I'd be pretty safe saying over half of our cases have that aspect to it.
Right. So if drugs were magically eradicated,
We wouldn't need the
you'd
state's
have a lot
attorney.
easier life, right?
It would be much slower paced. Yes.
Right.
Now, sir, whence cometh your young assistants, your young prosecutors in your office? Let's say you have a vacancy. How do you go about filling that vacancy, sir?
There's a couple of areas I can post. There's the Illinois State Appellate Prosecutors Association, which has a website which can post and certainly has active prosecutors looking to see if there's other job opportunities out there. I've posted with the Southern Illinois University School of Law. I've posted with the University of Illinois School of Law and posted on their websites. I've not necessarily posted on the Chicago colleges of law, and not that I'm against them, but I also want to make sure that if I'm drawing an assistant, they've been south of I-80 to understand what life is like.
Exactly.
You know, I don't want to have a culture shock and bring down an assistant who may want to be a prosecutor, but not in a community of 30,000 people.
Well, it's a reasonable statement to make that that these would be an assistant in the state's attorney's office would be considered a stepping stone in their career as they try to move along with their particular individual careers.
Correct. Correct. It gains a lot of experience because even more so than a lot of private practitioners, we're in the courtroom a lot,
Right.
a lot of litigation, and so sometimes it's that baptism by fire. You know, particularly in the larger state's attorney's office, it's here's your caseload. Good luck.
Yeah, you see, I think we're so insulated. My version, we're so insulated here in our little Barney Fife community that your young men that you bring along don't get exposed to some place like going into Cook County, where it must be a real maelstrom of.
We don't have the volume, thankfully, of cases, but in my tenure, I've prosecuted homicides, multiple homicides, attempted homicides, drug-induced homicides. So tragically, we've had some of those experiences, but we don't have near the volume, of even Peoria County.
Yeah.
I mean, they're in trial every week on gun cases and drug cases and crimes of violence.
Right.
What? Go ahead, Danny.
Well, you know, you say we're insulated, and I suppose I can't totally disagree, but I agree with what Jonathan says. I mean, I remember just some horrendous homicide cases, you know, that probably occurred during your tenure here, you know, that make you say, gosh, not in Logan County.
Well,
yes,
exactly.
In Logan County.
Well, the mobility of society, certainly in terms of transportation and moving, the social media, I don't know that any community in America is insulated anymore from anything.
Oh, exactly.
And that would include positive things, and that would then include negative things.
Right.
Yeah, we can't say we live in Mayberry anymore. That's just now, sir. As you develop your monthly schedules and plans, how far ahead do you have to plan for a court date for any given subject matter?
A couple of years ago, the judges redid the jury trial calendar. We used to have jury trials every month, and so you were kind of constantly finishing one perhaps, or finishing that month and then looking to the next. But because of the schedule and the number of trials or lack thereof, they went to every other month. So that helps us a little bit, have a little bit more prep time.
That's
to
just
work
in this circuit?
in our county.
Oh,
Every county's different.
Okay. All right.
McLean County probably has a much more frequent jury
Right.
trial system, but because of our volume of trials that actually go to litigation and full jury trial, we do it every other month.
Okay.
So that gives us a little bit more time looking down the road, getting subpoenas out, and that helps us a little bit narrow which cases we actually think are going to go to trial that following month. That way we're not doing subpoenas on 20 cases, incurring the costs of all those subpoenas, tying up people's schedule only to have maybe one go to trial or two go to trial.
Right.
So we can narrow the focus a little bit better.
Yeah.
You know, it occurs to me, you know, the state's attorney's office says, I keep wanting to say district attorney. I think of that.
That intro, yeah, that was quite a billing to live up to.
I planned that ahead. Mr. Rice was good enough to come up with that recording for me. The judges in our circuit, are they required to go to other circuits to fill in?
Not that I'm aware of on a regular basis. Occasionally they do if, I know recently Judge Workman handled a case in McLean County because some of the McLean County judges had a conflict with it, so they wanted to get someone out of county.
Sure.
And he heard that case, but not on a regular basis. It used to be, excuse me, when I first came to the area, Some of the judges used to be assigned 1 week in Cook County to help with their caseload up there. Judge Coogan, I think, used to do that, and before him, but I don't think that's done anymore, not to my knowledge.
Right. In our small county, I know when I worked at the newspaper, sometimes we had to write bad things about good people that we knew. There was no choice.
The facts.
The facts.
Yeah, just the facts, ma'am.
Do you ever encounter cases where people you personally know that you want to recuse yourself from those cases, or can you recuse yourself?
I can, and that's something that I need to be aware of as cases come through the office. Even if I don't review it myself, but I'm aware of it, an assistant is handling it, we can file a motion that there's either a conflict of interest or the appearance of it.
Right.
You know, the optics of a case can be just as important as the case itself.
Sure.
And even if there's not a conflict of interest, but there could be a perception of it, you know, that's the public needs to have confidence in it. So I mentioned the State Appellate Prosecutor's Office.
Right.
We contract with them for $12,000 a year. That covers all of the criminal appeals. We don't handle the criminal appeals. We contract with them to handle that. And then part of what that covers is conflict cases. So we have to have a court order from the judge saying we have a conflict or the appearance of it, and then he will appoint the State's Appellate Prosecutor's Office. And then they will come in and we're detached from it. We hand the file over to them.
Sure.
Are those positions where a young graduate lawyer could aspire to getting appointed to as a matter of information and growing in his own career? That type of I guess, I'm trying to think of the word here. Fiddler. I just got lost.
Lost in thought.
I'm between Beast and Burtonview somewhere, but it's a stepping stone perhaps for a young lawyer who's just out of school to get assigned to a commission like that, to listen to or read through and make their own judgments.
It is, and certainly they do their own independent hiring, but that's another resource that attorneys would have to look into. Again, there's high volume. They travel more, as you can well imagine, because they cover the state of Illinois. Generally speaking, they don't deal too much with Cook County or the collar counties, but the smaller counties, where this comes up more frequently just because of the nature of a smaller population, they travel quite a bit, and they get a variety of cases, so it is tremendous experience.
Yeah. Now you say you have to be in court at 1:45 or 9 o'clock, and I bet you money that when you appear in court, it won't be your first rodeo. How long have you been our state's attorney?
December 1st started my second term as an elected state's attorney.
Okay.
Yeah, he made it. I was surprised he made it.
Yeah, well, I convinced my wife to vote for me, so I knew I at least had 2 votes going into it. And Mr. Tackett and I were actually there that night watching the returns in the courthouse. We were one of the few people there still showing up.
You made my night very pleasant, you and your family.
That was enjoyable.
Yeah,
I remember the days when those rotundas were packed watching the return.
And our clerk has brought back that old custom for this election, which I think is a neat touch. It's a lot. It's a lot of work to set that thing up, and so God love her for that. Sally, kudos to you. In the course of a year's time, sir, what would be the most difficult type of case would come to the state attorney's desk?
The most difficult for me personally are the ones that involve crimes of violence or sex offenses that involve children.
Yeah, understandable.
And that does not minimize people who are victims who are adults, but it hits hardest for me when the victims are children.
You know, that speaks to, I have a dear friend whose daughter is with Children and Family Services, a job which I don't think, Mr. Tackett, you and I can do well because of our makeup. Besides that, she puts up with a lot of bureaucracy. For instance, there was a terrible case over in Morgan County that a youngster was found in a dumpster, and it became this lady's job to shepherd that on behalf of that youngster, that baby. And she placed the baby for adoption ultimately through the bureaucracy, the way it worked. and she caught hell from the top bureaucrats for not placing the baby in the right ethnic family. Well, sometimes common sense just gets thrown out with the bathwater.
And with that agency, there is a lot of bureaucracy. A lot of good people trying to do the right thing, and they run into a lot of that bureaucracy. Yeah. But I know it's difficult for those even more so on the front lines of it, whether they be DCFS investigators, first responders, police officers. It's hard enough to see the pictures, which we have to look through. Yeah. It's even more pronounced for those who are firsthand on scene. And I know they go through an awful lot. Yeah. They go through an awful lot responding to car crashes out on the interstate, right, and extractions of children deceased. They absorb an awful lot. Exactly. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for what
our guest this morning has been Jonathan Wright. We're going to excuse Jonathan because there's a little frog out there on the highway, in case you hadn't noticed, and he has to be in court at 9 o'clock, and that's 20 minutes hence. Jonathan, we'll go to a commercial, and we thank you very much for being with us, and you can skip out of this studio now and get back to work.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. District Attorney.
Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jonathan.
Thank you.
As always.
Go right ahead, Jim. And we're right back live in the studios here. The program is Viewpoint. The old program appears each Wednesday morning at 8:15 to 9 o'clock. And by the way, I would also tell you there's another program that appears on WLCN Sunday mornings at 9 o'clock to 10. That's called Your Sunday Morning Swing. So that little quick put in there, Mr. Fiddler.
You got to do it. Toot your own horn. Go ahead.
My associate host this morning is Mr. Dan Tackett. Mrs. Busby had an appointment, and so we'll welcome her back next week. But we may not keep her. Well, Jim and I'll have to talk about that. We had a lawyer board. We had our state's attorney board. And I came across a lawyer quote says, "I busted a mirror and got 7 years bad luck, but my lawyer thinks he can get me by with 5." All right, that's my weak lawyer story. Then we were talking about off air here while the commercials were being played, things going on in the community. Number one, of course, we have a mayoral election coming up here next Tuesday. How do you see that, sir, from your standpoint? You're got your nose to the grindstone?
You know, I see it, unfortunately, as just another local election that's not based at all on issues, but just personalities.
That's an interesting observation, and there's certainly a number of issues that could be addressed, not the least of which is how you formulate a long-range plan to fix our infrastructure, primarily our streets, among other things. There's nothing been said about that. That's certainly a major that we experience every day. You made an interesting observation in there because there are a lot of opportunities for certain issues to be discussed.
Right. And you know, along the same lines, I think it's kind of sad that there hasn't really been a lot of public forums for those issues to be brought up. We did have the one at Lincoln College, and thank goodness for Lincoln College and the Chamber of Commerce for hosting that. But there again, I didn't attend it. I watched some of the taping of it. I didn't see a lot of deep issues questioned or explored there by the candidates. Kind of used to be same thing, election after election after election. What does Lincoln need? Well, every candidate in the world would say more jobs, more business,
same goal.
So, which one of those candidates are you going to vote for? The one that wants more jobs, or the other one that wants more jobs? So it boils down to
less taxes. Yeah,
it just boils down to a popularity contest, and I'm not so convinced that the best candidate for the job always wins.
That's an interesting observation with your repertorial experiences. How long were you working with our community as a reporter and later as an editor, sir?
I retired 2 weeks shy of my 45th anniversary. And fortunately or unfortunately, Used to see Jim Ash at those city council meetings. I covered those meetings probably for well more than 30 years of my career. First mayor that I covered was Ed Mowridge.
I'll be darned.
Ed Mowridge, Bill Wilson,
Pete Andrews,
John Gazzardo, Joan Ritter.
That's down through the line.
Down through the line.
Well, unfortunately, I'm the only one left who can go up there and look at those mayor's pictures in city council.
Remember most of them.
And go back to George M. Eberly.
Yeah.
Nobody else but me knows who any of them were. As your in your capacity now as a sometime writer, and Jim and I agree that you're a pretty good writer, fiddler.
Oh, thank you.
In your capacity as a sometime writer, what do you see, sir, as maybe our most pressing problem?
Wow.
We have so many pressing problems that that's a difficult.
Boy, I hate to sound like those.
That's a softball.
I hate to sound like those candidates of old, but we need to get more business and more jobs here in Lincoln. I mean, people leave Lincoln because there's no place here to work that pays a decent wage. I'm not going to say no place, but those places are far and few between.
Yes, my brother came back from Arizona not too long ago, and he came into the house and he said, "What happened to downtown?" And that's an interesting thing. I said, "Well, it's an interesting thing. What happened downtown? Everything went west." And the box stores and so forth, they made a big difference. It's pretty hard today to go in and buy a number 10 screw 3 inches long. That's just, you're going to have to buy a package of 10 of them.
Exactly.
Whether you need them or not.
Yeah.
The 648-5510. Somebody might have a comment or two about the but if you do, be very careful. Remember, we're on the air. We don't want to offend anybody. No, these people that are running are all trying.
There's four good candidates out there.
That takes a commitment, and it's a job that you and I would not aspire to by under any mantle. Wouldn't want to wear that hat. I was asked many years ago about that, and I said, "Thank you. I thought you were my friend."
Exactly.
So that's what happened. We had a very successful businessman in town, many years back, and he wanted to run me for the state legislature. And I said, "Gosh, Harold, I thought you were my friend. I didn't think you'd wish that on me."
Exactly.
But,
and Lincoln has technically a weak mayor form of government. Mm-hmm. The mayor votes to break a tie, essentially. That's the mayor's power. But we've had some pretty influential leadership in that mayor's position who's been able to strongly sway the council into their viewpoints, their programs, their issues. And at one time, not in the too distant past, we had a city council that just wouldn't oppose anything.
Yes, that's pretty acquiescent, yes. Then we had, and I mean with respect, then we had the Dobby Shays who would pound the table and say, "Not in my backyard."
Exactly, yeah.
Now, we have 4 folks out there that are working hard, and if anybody has any particular endorsements that they would like to do, we would accept that. Just remember, we have to be very circumspect about how we do it. But how do you see, as you look down the road, I think it's providential. This is my opinion now, obviously, but I think it's providential that we have in today's times and the amount of money that goes is handled, that we have a city manager form. I think that's just almost imperative in this community.
Now don't equate city manager form with having a city administrator, what we have now, because a city manager is a a legal type of government that
that's
people have to vote on.
Yes, you defined.
Right.
I was out on the limb there, and you brought me back to the trunk.
Okay.
Yeah.
City administrator, sure. Gosh, how big is the city budget now? $26 million, something like that. Sure, you need a professional in there. A good bean counter, I guess. But on the other hand, when we just had the city clerk as the bean counter, I'll have to say Nita Josrand and now Susan Gumbaugh performed very well in those positions. And I know the issue has been brought up on the campaign trail that has our city administrator been given too much power. And I think that's an issue that probably does need to be explored.
I don't have any idea, no cognizance whatsoever of the delineation of power there, how that is handled. But it just seemed to me that we function so much better with the city administrator as opposed to not having one, because the mayor essentially can't devote the kind of time or expertise
exactly
which the city administrator brings to the table for us.
Right. And I have heard at least one, maybe more of the candidates bring up the fact that, hey, we need to return to a committee structure. For even at the time I retired, all during my career and long before that, there were council committees, one on streets and alleys, one on law enforcement. I think there were like 10 committees at one time, and each one had an arena that they were
their
supposed
area of expertise. Yeah.
Exactly. And that committee, similar to the legislature, would usually vote on issues and bring their recommendation to the city council. And that's totally been eliminated. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I think it takes the alderman out of a lot of fact-finding that you need for decision-making.
I think you hit upon an important salient there, fact-finding, knowing whereof you vote, rather than just acquiesce and go along with the program.
Right. In the past few months, we've had a private citizen do some extensive research on a couple of pretty controversial issues and brought those before the council. Well, at one time, I think our city council would have done that kind of research. But, that doesn't happen anymore.
Well, you're kind of referring to a more hands-on type of council.
Yes, indeed.
Is what you're talking about.
Indeed.
Yeah. Dan, as you closed out your career in the newspaper business, what particular incident or incidents, plural, would come to mind quickly that you have covered?
Unfortunately, I kind of echo Jonathan Wright. Horrendous homicide cases. The Russell Smirker case, the Schneider family killings, and very obviously, in more recent times, the Beeson family massacre. Those are things that just really stick in your gut,
Yeah, those are things that you do not want to bring up to the officers who were in charge there. For instance, our sheriff had a horrendous job and responsibilities connected with that, and that's something that would have to weigh on any individual heavily for a long time.
Exactly. Yeah, that's when the respect for those first responders really hits a peak.
Tell me, your career, at what point in time in your career were you working with the Nugent family?
Actually, I did not work for
That's
the
what
Nugent
I was trying
family.
to put together.
I came on board immediately after the Nugents sold the Courier to the Joy family from
Centralia.
It was their goal to expand the Courier base into Mason County. And I was hired on as their first Mason County correspondent. I was living up by Armington at that time, and I would get up in the morning and hop on nearby US 136 and head to Havana, do the courthouse rounds, and then race back to Mason City and stop at their little police department and get their police blotter news. And I would, before noon, I think at that time deadline was like 12:30 or 12:45 in the afternoon, and I had a noon deadline every day. I'd get on the phone and call in my court beat and my police beat.
And for that, he got paid a nickel and a half.
Exactly, yeah. And if the culprits were sentenced to prison, I think that was a dime per head on that. You know.
Did you ever have an occasion as a reporter to go interview anybody who was in prison?
I never did.
I was just curious to know if that was
right. I interviewed a couple of folks who ended up in prison, one being Dan Walker, our former governor.
Yeah, well, among others.
Interviewed him up at Hotel Lincoln as he was walking through the state of Illinois.
When he was walking at that time, yeah. Well, we have a unique system here in Illinois. We seem to find every other year we find a governor or two to send off to prison.
Exactly. Right. And some politicians who maybe should be there but have always managed to dodge the bullet.
In the interest of staying out of court ourselves, we won't go there. Well, which reminds me, we appreciate very much you're sitting in with us, Dan.
Well, thanks for having me, Bill. I've enjoyed this.
Judy commented that you said a very nice thing about her last week, which she appreciated very, very much. You know, we had a lawyer gone here this morning, and he's done. Jonathan does a whale of a job for us up there in that courthouse. As we say, we're well represented up here. But Jonathan is a lawyer, and so we'll close with lawyer jokes. How many lawyer jokes are there? One. The rest of them are true. Thank you for Viewpoint.